Well, good morning, my friends. It's your old pal Jordan the Lion, and today we're coming to you from just outside of Madison, Wisconsin. We're gonna start today's vlog in a little place, as you can see right here, says the village of Maple Bluff. Daze with Jordan the Lion begins now. So as I'm sure you can tell, we are on the start of a new road trip. So for the next couple of weeks, we are gonna be traveling through the Midwest. And today I wanted to start with someone near and dear to my heart, someone who, when I was a kid, I used to watch him on TV and I used to watch his movies, and I don't know that there's anybody that I related to in those days more than him, because I was an overweight kid and it was really cool to see someone on TV who could make light of that. And so today we are going to go visit the Madison haunts, or the Madison hangouts. The place is near and dear to the life of Chris Farley, so we're gonna start our journey today going by his childhood home. And today's vlog will also be a special Patreon sunglass vlog for Tracy Myers. Thank you, Tracy Myers, for becoming a Patreon. As you can tell, when we drive through this neighborhood, Chris Farley had a pretty nice upbringing. Pretty great family, too. And as you can see right here, Chris's family neighborhood and home, Maple Bluff, is right here by the lake. So here it is, Chris Farley's childhood home. The home where his wonderful personality and sense of humor was cultivated. He had a great childhood, but always strove for attention. His brother said every time we would be out playing outside, my brother would be yelling, "Hey Mom, watch me do this. Watch me shoot a basket, watch me jump this." He said he was constantly looking for attention. But a lot of the great personality came from just being in a fun household. His dad was a great, really great salesman, ran a business here, and was basically the guy you saw depicted in Tommy Boy as Tommy Boy's dad. And what his brother said was that their dad was great because he didn't get mad at the big things. He got mad at the little things. So if you were late getting into the car, or you were supposed to go somewhere and you weren't ready, he would get mad. He'd blow up at little things. But overall, he was a pretty cool guy, and it was not a strict household. And they said that when he would come home from work, he would basically get all the kids riled up until something broke or someone got hurt, and they'd say, "See, you went and took it too far." But in reality, it was all because of him. He was the one that had got them all going. And Chris would end up imitating his dad in a lot of the characters that he would create. So when you would see him being the O'Herlihy boys' mentor, where Adam Sandler is this kid looking for someone to adopt him and let him live with him, you would pan over to Chris Farley and he'd go, "Let him move in with you. He said he'd clean the sheets. Why you gotta be so mean? Let the boy be happy." So he had a pretty cool upbringing, and like I said, they were very supportive. In fact, they kind of had to be, because Chris was not the easiest kid, even though he wasn't a, terrible kid. He had a bad habit of doing anything anyone dared him to do. And so it was said that he often would drop his pants or take his shirt off for a laugh. One time he was dared in keyboarding class to, typing class, to take his junk out and type as though he hadn't done anything, and he did it, and he got in trouble. And when his dad came, he basically let it go. And in fact, one time they said, one of the times they were in there visiting the principal, Chris told him, "Well, nobody loves me at home." And he said his dad just sat there shaking his head and said, "Yeah, he's the only kid in the household with a 10-speed bike, but nobody loves him at home. Yeah." So Chris was the middle child of 5 and was the funniest of the 5. They said that they would, since they were somewhat wealthy, his father was a great businessman, owned his own business, that they, or in the early days, were able to get a recorder so that they could record movies. And they said Chris would sit and just take in comedy constantly. He would watch the characters in the background for what they were doing. He would watch the heavy people to see what they were doing that was funny, and that would just all become part of his personality. And they said he loved to be in the group, but he also loved to stand out. So he had this great, hilarious thing about him. They said that he had to show off when there was a beautiful woman around. So they said he would, you know, in some cases, if he had a beer, he would just, when he was older, you know, like in college and things, he would just pour the beer over his head, or he would see a woman coming and he would drop down and start doing push-ups and go, 198, 199, 200. They just said he was just, you know, kind of a ham that way. But for as funny as he was always wanting to please people. And that's one of those things that they said that later on in life would kind of lead him to go into drugs and alcohol, is that he felt the need to, when people wanted to offer him things, he wanted to make them happy. And he was always that way as a kid. Like I said, he would take any dare because he wanted to make people happy. So Chris grew up here and ended up going to a Catholic high school. Even Adam Sandler said in his latest comedy special, he said even if Chris was tore up from a night of partying, he would always get up for mass. And so Chris was pretty devout. In fact, his other friends said, you know, if we would walk by a homeless person, Chris would want to give them money, because he would say, you know, Jesus could come back in any form, God could come back in any form, you know, what if that's him? And so he ended up going to a Catholic high school, which is kind of funny to think of. When I just told you some of the shenanigans he would do, you know, he'd be on the bus and he would take his shirt off, or if he was performing in something, they said later on, if he was like in a comedy sketch group or anything, right before they were going to take the stage, he would like drop his pants. And he ended up going to Marquette University. And they said there, because he loved football so much when he was living here in Madison, Marquette didn't have a football team. So he went out for rugby because he was a really great athlete. They said even though he had, you know, a unique body style for being athletic, he was very agile and he could do a lot of things. So he joined the rugby team. And one of the first times that anybody met him, they said that, you know, Chris would show up wearing like khaki pants, dressed all preppy, because he felt like he had to be like a performer when he showed up at college. Chris attended Marquette, and it was pretty much like what you see in Tommy Boy. A lot of Tommy Boy was based around Chris's real life experiences and his real family. And so he ended up going to Marquette, and that's where he joined a kind of a variety show for a one-time performance. Decided he really loved doing acting, and when he came back to Madison after finishing school, he decided to start looking for somewhere where he could release this energy. And so he decided to look around for a local theater. And so where we're going to go to now is actually where he started performing. This is really interesting for me to see, because I've watched everything I could see about Chris Farley my whole life. Anytime anything comes out, I watch, and they always show home movies of him in the backyard here shooting hoops or playing with his brothers and sister. But I remember seeing one where he's out playing in the snow, and you can see the sidewalk right here. So they were actually playing like right here. Well, here we are. This is the laundromat that Chris Farley used to do his laundry in. I'm kidding. This was actually the Ark Theater. This was the theater here in Madison that Chris got really his start at, I guess you would say, as far as being on the road to a career. This was probably the start of it, because he did go to a summer camp where he used to do plays and things like that, so he developed the love there. But one day he came here, the Ark Theater, in the evening, had already tied one on, and came in and asked the instructor here, do you guys give classes? And the guy said, yeah, but I mean, we're done for the night, so if you want to come take one tomorrow, you're welcome to come in. We have one at 9 a.m. So, oh, thank you so much, thank you. I can't thank you enough. And so the next day, he comes in for that class at 9 a.m. And the woman teaching it was actually the wife of the man who told him to come. And she calls her husband and says, did you tell some big guy to come in and take my class this morning? And he said, oh, yeah, I did. And she said, well, he showed up with a case of beer. Now, what's cool about this building is that this is where he developed and first debuted my favorite character that I think he ever did, Matt Foley. the motivational speaker who lives in a van down by the river. Now what he would do is he was not a creative guy as far as writing sketches or anything like that, which is kind of surprising because he would eventually go on to Second City and go on to Saturday Night Live, and those places you're kind of in a position where you're supposed to write material, but he didn't have that ability, so people would bring ideas and he could really capitalize on them. But Matt Foley was his idea because he was kind of wrapping up different things that he had spotted in life, little characteristics, but he also incorporated that part of his dad that would blow up and kind of like shout at various times. So if you've never seen the character, I think it's the best thing he ever did. It's a 35-year-old motivational speaker who basically demonstrates all the things not to do in life by telling about his own life. And so that's where he would come into people's homes and, I know what you're thinking. You're gonna reach up and grab the world, wrap the tail around your finger, pull it down, put it in your pocket. Well, I'm here to tell you that what you're probably gonna do is amount to jack squat. I am Matt Foley. I'm 35 years old. I am divorced, and I live in a van down by the river. Now, what's funny about that name is that was actually his friend. Matt Foley was a friend of his, and they said that what Chris would do is when he would do these characters, he would, if he saw a friend of his out in the audience, he would name the character after that friend. And so one night, everybody kind of came to see this motivational speaker guy. They always knew what time he was taking the stage at Second City. Like I said, it started here, but he eventually took it to his training at Second City. And they said one night he saw his friend Matt Foley, called him Matt Foley, and said, I'm never changing it. Now, not only did Chris Farley get his start here at the Ark, but also Joan Cusack and Bonnie Hunt attended classes here. I know it's just a laundromat, but when you know that Chris Farley was starting his career in here, now he actually wasn't, he did have a career outside of comedy because he, you know, was basically unemployable, so his dad gave him a job. But this is what he would basically do in his other time and eventually turn it into his full-time gig. Isn't that cool to see? So I would guess by the way it's laid out and the construction of the building, they said this was originally like a car garage, like a mechanic. So I would guess that the audience and seating would be out here, and then the stage would be somewhere right around here, because you can definitely tell that's a different background area. So that probably would have been the backstage area back here. Wow, that's where Matt Foley started. Unfortunately, I won't get to go to the Circus Museum in Baraboo or the House on the Rock because they're both closed this time of year. So right here in this office was where the Scotch Oil Company was, and that was the business that Chris Farley's father ran. Like I said, Chris was heavily influenced by his father, mostly personality-wise, and so his father saw that, knew that Chris had this abundance of energy, knew that he was a very unique guy, and knew that he was instantly likable, but he also knew he was pretty much unemployable. So his father groomed him to take over the business, which was basically what they did. They sold oil here to pavers and asphalt companies. So what he ended up doing was he ended up giving Chris a job as a salesman. Now, Chris didn't actually have to go up and drum any sales up or anything. In fact, his brother said when I would go into his office, I'd say, "What are you doing in here, champ?" And he'd look around the office and he said there was no semblance of work going on. He said if you pulled open the desk drawers, you would see Cracked magazine, Mad magazine, toys. Basically like in Tommy Boy, when you saw him sitting in his office speaking, doing that, "Luke, I am your father," into the fan. That's basically what Chris Farley was doing. But his father said, you know, he knew Chris had a great personality, and so what he did was when he needed to close a deal, he would send Chris out to basically party with these guys. So Chris was telling his friend, he's like, all I have to do is my dad tells me to take these guys out to dinner, eat and drink and laugh with them. And then at the end, I say, my dad wants you to sign this contract. Do you think that'd be cool? Like, can you do that? And they're like, yeah, of course. So they would sign the contract. Chris said I'd bring the contract back, give it to my dad, and my dad just gives me money. you can imagine he would have been good at that, you know, and like I said, so much of Chris's early life mirrors the movie Tommy Boy. So when you see him on the road trying to make those sales of Callahan tires and everything, that really was Chris. And David Spade said that Chris developed something that he, I think, picked up from his father, and he said every time he would meet somebody, he would do this. When he shook your hand, he would do this real deep voice and go, "Hello, I'm Chris Farley of Callahan Auto and Pavers," and he would just make up some company name, do this real deep voice, and he thinks that he picked that up while he was doing this kind of sales stuff. So while working here, Chris would take the classes at the Ark Theater that we were already at, and he would eventually move on to go to Chicago, and he would do the Improv Olympic, and then he would get to join Second City, which was just a dream for him, because that was really working with Del Close, and both of those places was, you know, he was a creative mastermind genius. He was a teacher that didn't necessarily teach comedy, but he taught how to access your imagination, how to build things into bigger things, or how to make a small gesture mean more than a big gesture. And so he really taught creativity. Chris took those and then went on to Saturday Night Live, had a great career. Now we're going to head off to his, unfortunately, his grave. Well, sadly, here we are, Resurrection Cemetery. I did think it was interesting that the cemetery is on Farley Street. I'll definitely say this is a beautiful cemetery. Well, here we are in the chapel. I believe Chris is right behind the altar. Yep, there he is. Right at the very top. Christopher Crosby Farley. February 15th, 1964, December 18th, 1997. Wow, so sad, man. Passed away the same way that one of his heroes did, John Belushi, from a speedball. Said Chris was always kind of known to be a partier since he was in high school and college, and always wanted to make people happy, so when he was at parties and people would offer him things, he would do it, and develop some pretty costly habits. I believe I heard at one point he had attended over a dozen rehabs. One time it was actually caused by Black Sheep, the movie. His movie that was the follow-up to Tommy Boy. It wasn't a sequel, but it was a follow-up. It was the same style of movie, and the movie was greenlit within only having 60 pages of the script done. Just wasn't a great movie, and when they had the first showing of it, Chris went with some of his friends, and he relapsed that night for the first time, or one of the times. And Adam Sandler said it was always sad because he knew he was doing bad things to himself, and you'd say something to him and he'd go, I know, what am I doing? But it was sad because Adam said we could tell just by looking at him. You know, you look in his eyes and he just didn't look the same, or his skin was all sweaty, or he was heavier, and when he had gone through rehab, he would lose weight. So sadly, he passed away far too young. Far too young. Now, what I love about him is that he was so great at being a character and bringing such unique things to what he worked on. I think some of my favorite things that he did were things that he wasn't the star of, like, well, Dirty Work. He plays the guy who got his nose bit off by a woman in Saigon, and he always talks about that. And when there's a fight that breaks out in the bar he's in, he goes over to the jukebox and he goes, oh yeah, Rolling Stone, Street Fighting Man. And then you hear the music kick on, and it's, if you like pina coladas. But he was also in both Wayne's World movies. He had two different parts in the Wayne's World movies. He was in Coneheads as Connie Conehead's love interest. He was in Billy Madison as the disgruntled bus driver. Almost Heroes, he was amazing. He was just great in everything. Everything he was in. Now what's really sad also is if you hear, or if you check out Adam Sandler's latest comedy special, he writes a song to Chris, and he mentions in there that they told him, hey, you're going to end up like Belushi and Candy. And he was like, that's cool. Those guys are my heroes, you know. It's almost like he didn't plan on living long, but his friend said, you know, Chris told us what he really wanted in the end was a family and a house out, you know, kind of like how he grew up. Like a, you know, nice family, a house that's beautiful out in the middle of nowhere, and just live a normal life. But he just lived far too fast for that, and I think he left an amazing comedy legacy. To me, he's really one of the greatest Saturday Night Live performers of all time, not just of his class or of the 90s, but he really dominated, in my opinion, all the greatest highlights from that history of that show. He's got to be mentioned in there. Rest in peace, Chris. So Adam Sandler said that he used to share an office with Chris Farley when they were on Saturday Night Live, and he said one day he walked in and Chris had his headphones on, and when he turned around, Adam could tell that he'd been crying. He'd been tearing up, and he said, what are you listening to, man? Why are you crying? He said, I'm listening to Casey and the Sunshine Band. He said, why are you crying? You should be dancing. He said, that reminds me of my dad. Adam Sandler also said the last big party moment that they all had together was at Tim Meadows' wedding, and he said Chris had us laughing all night, doing his normal things, just being crazy, being overly energetic, being him. And he said, you know, it's sad that we didn't know he only had a few more months after this. Sadly, he was found on the linoleum floor of his apartment in Chicago. He had overdosed and he was found by his brother. So this is one of the saddest graves that I've probably ever gone to because I was such a big fan of this guy. And if you were wondering, all of Chris's friends came for his funeral. David Spade, Chris Rock, Adam Sandler, Tim Meadows, they were all here. It just kind of bums me out just a little bit because you don't have anything underneath his name right there. You see here it'll say loving mother or loving son. Should say beloved entertainer, comedian, son, brother. You kind of expect that they had some sort of service here. Now I have one more place I'd like to go to because here in Madison, Chris Farley's legacy lives on in a positive way. Before we leave, take a look at this. This is one of the cooler graves I've ever seen. Right out in front of the headstone there's a statue of a woman crying. Take note, that's what I want if I die anytime. Well, this is certainly not how I planned on ending it, but it's an unfortunate reality. I said it was going to be kind of a bright moment at the end of the vlog, but when I got here I noticed the building we're looking for, what used to be the Hope Haven Chris Farley house. It was a rehabilitation center for people with drug and alcohol abuse problems. The house is gone. It used to sit right here, and you can tell by looking at the front that this is all newly built. So there was a house here and there was a house here, and they're both gone. That is unfortunate, because I was gonna say what a great legacy to have live on after you've passed, that in your town there's a rehabilitation center in your name, but unfortunately it's no longer here. Well, my friends, thank you for watching. This was a great day for me. I really feel honored to get to come out and share some of Chris Farley's life with you all. A guy who was just naturally funny, just a good-hearted person, and unfortunately had a short life. But his comedy lives on, and his life made a lot of people's lives a lot brighter. So thank you for watching. Rest in peace, Chris Farley. And Tracy Myers, I hope you enjoyed your Patreon Sunglass vlog. We'll see you all later. Have a great night. Goodbye. Fat man in a little coat. Fat man in a little coat.